Hello and welcome, everybody. Welcome to the 2021 EMEA Regional Member Summit. I love these events as it's an opportunity for all of us to come together as a community and connect and grow and give back, and of course, focus on iMasons' core initiatives. Joining me today are Eddie Schutter and Christian Belady. Eddie's the CTO of Switch and an iMasons board member. Eddie is also the executive sponsor of our new technology committee. Christian Belady is a VP and distinguished engineer at Microsoft and a founding member of iMasons. He has agreed to help launch and guide the technology committee, but as the vice chair. The vision is that we will recruit a new fresh face for the key chair role to help lead the committee along with Christian and Eddie. Let us know if you have any recommendations for that spot. Over the last 15 months, iMasons has unified the industry on a common sustainability vision. Every click improves the future. A future where digital infrastructure contributes to the global economy and society without harming the planet. This is such an important balance to achieve, but for it to succeed, we have to come together as an industry to ensure that our work is greater than the sum of its parts. Hyperscalers like Microsoft, Google, Apple, Amazon, Facebook, as well as many of our other 40+ partner companies have made bold commitments to sustainability and are applauded for their leadership. But the big question remains, is this enough for us to save the planet? Many say we need to do more, including two of my fellow panel members here. They believe we have to think differently. So guys, we're going to dive into the details shortly, but first I wanted to share with everybody how I met both of you. So Christian, I don't know if you remember, but you and I met on May 9th, 2005, and yes, I did take your picture, at the Data Center Users Group Conference in St. Louis, along with Dave Moss from Dell, Roger Schmidt from IBM. I think you were with HP at the time. I was with Sun Microsystems, and we were on stage together debating, as always, about what was next, even back then. So that was pretty fun.
Yes, and I remember, and we didn't agree. We were actually debating pretty vigorously. Yeah,
that's right. And we won't remind everybody who won, just so you know.
Yeah.
It was all good stuff. Yep. So Eddie, you and I met on June 3rd, 2008, and that was through our CIOs at Sun Microsystems and AT&T. So Bob and Thaddeus, I think it was. And I got to say, that started some really fun work and collaboration that, of course, we've done for more than a decade now, and it continues to this day, hence on this panel. So Eddie, I know you've tolerated me for a decade now. I appreciate that.
It's all good. We've done great things together. So.
Yep, awesome. All the greater good here. Look, all three of us have been involved in industry groups for, again, over a decade. So the Data Center Users Group, the Green Grid, Data Center Pulse, and Infrastructure Masons now. But I think that this time our approach is a little bit different. So we've built a community that is uniting the builders of the digital age. And we do help connect, grow, and give back for all of our members. But I'm interested from both of you of why you commit your time. Why do you actually do what you do within the community like this? So Christian, why don't we start with you?
So, I've been involved in all those bodies that you talked about, and a lot of them were about standards and things like that. But in the particular of iMasons, and as you know, we talked about this when you were looking to start this organization. Mm-hmm. I really looked for healthy debate where we can really talk about the problems we see well into the future, not as much of the immediate needs. And you listed them all, inclusion, sustainability, technology, and some of these things really can't be done by individual companies. And it's not about individual companies making sure that they have their needs met, but it's more about how do we actually, as a collective, working together, really do like I always say, the 1 + 1 = 3 problem, solving climate change, solving all these things where we have a much bigger reach together as an industry as opposed to individual companies. We all have our sustainability goals. They're all great goals, but if we just accomplish our goals on our own, we really haven't changed much, because as singular companies, we're still small relative to the global scale. Mm-hmm. So for me, the big deal is pulling us all together, working together, and really driving change, and that's how we actually change the world, together and collectively.
Yep. Awesome. Awesome. Again, it's all about us being a team at this.
Yeah.
So Eddie, give us your perspective. Why do you do what you do here?
Yeah, I mean, again, we've been a part of a lot of different organizations and spend a great deal of time developing standards or communicating best practices. And really, what I found in iMasons, and of course, we've been there since the beginning, even talking about it, weeks before. I think we were getting a sustainability award when we were both at eBay at a Seattle Seahawks game.
That's right.
When we started conversations about how do we do this in a way where we are more inclusive, right? But I think the main thing, and it really kind of lands back on our values. And I don't mean to overstate the values of what iMasons is about, but it is about sharing the knowledge I have, the experience, and the understanding, and then also sharing these best practices and everything, but doing that in a way to get it to people who haven't had the opportunities I've had, who haven't had the experiences that I've had, and then also in the process, just learning that I'm getting to grow at the same time. I'm every time I give back, or the more that I give and participate, the more I gain, and so it just continues to become this sort of circular process for me.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. You guys know where I stand on this. I love community and the ability for us to actually come together. It is really greater than the sum of its parts, and the passionate people behind us.
Yeah, could I just add, I always say, and Eddie's absolutely right. For me, our success is measured by the success of those that follow. And I think it's, in terms of the giving back, I think it's really important for us to really develop folks and people and industry leaders to really take things far beyond anything we could have even imagined. And I think that's the important role for some of us older industry folks.
You mean us? Yes. Yeah.
I don't know who I'm talking about.
That's right. I did shave. I got rid of my gray beard.
Yeah, exactly.
I lost a few years.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I wish I had your elderly look, Dean.
I wish I had your Lamborghini, but that's the way it is.
Yeah.
So look, I'd like to share a little more about your current roles as well. Each of you guys have had stellar careers already, but you seem to be more in the zone than ever, from my perspective. So Christian, you've been with Microsoft for over 10 years now, I believe. And 2 years ago, you moved into a new role focused on data center advanced development.
Yep.
So first, why did you move into that role? Okay, I think that's very important. Secondly, what are you working on? What can you share?
Okay. All right. So it's actually almost 3 years ago now. I took my sabbatical. We get to take a sabbatical every now and then to think about what we want to do when we grow up. And in my particular case, I did a lot of reflecting on where things are, what we've accomplished as a team, what I've accomplished, and I started looking and really spending more time, because I had time now, to really think about where we were going as an industry. And of course, as you all know, I was leading a lot of the growth at Microsoft and developing a lot of the growth at Microsoft with a really fantastic team. But what I saw was we were starting to get back into the situation of just doing the same thing, stepping and repeating, and we were more concerned, and we still should be concerned about getting capacity and developing the capacity as the demands for the cloud grow. But I always like to think beyond today, and I started just looking at, well, what happens if we're 10 times bigger? And as you know, Dean, that's the question I always say. What happens when we're 10 times bigger?
Right.
And we start hitting limits or non-linearities into the future. And so with that, and also the loss of a couple of friends during my sabbatical, it just made me think, we should have a much bigger purpose and really think about what is the legacy we leave behind. Is it going to be just these massive data center buildings and network and all of this? And by the way, it keeps growing and expanding and having a larger and larger presence? Or do we really rethink the future and still meet all of the needs of really our customers and the planet, frankly? And when I came back to Microsoft, my goal was really to focus on the future, and you know, either that or, you know, as I mentioned earlier, I was saying, talking about our age, to really even take a step back and do something completely different. But being that I work for a fantastic company, the opportunity was afforded to me to actually do technology development that could potentially change how we do things, what, you know, what we do in the future, and even rethink what a data center is. And so that's what we're working on now. And then, you know, we have some projects that are shorter term. We have projects that are 5 years out. We have some projects that won't manifest themselves for 10 years. And, you know, I tell everyone I'm lucky in that I get to play in the sandbox now and really think about some of these technologies. And you probably saw some of the early stuff we were working on, which was immersion cooling. Not that that was something completely new, but it was really the first time that we were really looking at doing this at scale. We're looking at optical stuff. We're looking at certainly energy generation, and storage technologies. And so we're really working on things that will make a big impact to how we see a data center today. I can't give you all the details, of course, but we do have some great projects that as it get to a maturity level where we think it can make a difference, we will start talking about them. But it's really about how do I make the nonlinearities not matter in our business. So that's what we're working on now.
Awesome.
It's a lot of fun.
We're gonna dive into a little bit more on that one, just about the thinking differently aspects of this. But great, thanks for sharing that, Christian. It really it helps to understand the motivation that people have of why they do what they do. And speaking of which, Eddie, 3 years ago you joined Switch as their CTO, and that was fun because we got to work together at eBay, right? Raise a lot of ruckus, split the company, all types of things. So that was a lot of fun. But tell us about your role.
Right. Well, I mean, obviously, as CTO, I have responsibilities for the, you know, stewardship of our technologies and our intellectual property and what we're doing, how we develop products and services. But really, I mean, the main thing that I get to do at Switch, which is exciting and similar to Christian, right? My boss is an inventor, and he tends to explore new ground in lots of different areas, and he's always pushing the bar. You know, our company is. What I love about our company is we're constantly raising the bar for all of us to strive to do more beyond just what we do on a daily basis. And we look at our data centers and we look at our technologies as platforms. And again, sort of to Christian's comment earlier, you know, 1 + 1 has to equal 3. For Rob, it has to equal 5. So we have to do a lot more. But at the end of the day, you know, when I'm riffing with Rob about technologies or ideas, or the rest of our innovation teams, right, and what we're working through and how we're developing new solutions for problems for our customers, but also as we're doing that in sustainable ways, and we're doing that in ways that incorporates diversity of thought, diversity of people, and, you know, just really driving these activities. It's just natural for our culture at Switch to be able to drive and do these things. So it just expands upon, you know, the idea that the technologies we put in place allows us to do more than just innovation of our existing activity, or even, you know, optimizing our current operations. We're trying to penetrate these problems in a way that have a much bigger exponential impact. And as a result, you know, we all benefit from it, not just economically, but also socially and environmentally.
Yeah, and what I like here is that just with your background, this backdrop, it gives a perfect perspective into what we're talking about today, right? So you've lived, eaten, breathed this stuff for decades now, and yes, that makes us old. But over the last few months, we've had some deep discussions with the board, our advisory council, our members, and it's all about our expanding strategy to focus on technology. And as I've been talking with each of you, you've expressed that you don't believe it will be enough, that we have to think differently. than what we're doing. You just touched on this, Christian. So can you tell me a little bit about what you mean by that?
Technology in itself is kind of useless unless it's integrated in some fashion. And so for me, the big thing about technology is an enabler. Whenever we've developed technology, what we always find, there's some bigger thing that it enables. And so we really need to think more about the ecosystem. And so for me, the future is all about how we improve the ecosystem, and technology just plays a role in that. What also plays a role in that is the diversity of thought that comes in from different industries. I almost don't like the word, technology development, because it is too narrow for me. And at the end of the day, for me, it's the ecosystems out there, whether we're looking at natural systems, whether we're looking at infrastructure. It's all about how we get all of this collectively to kind of evolve together. And this thread, the technology thread, is a piece of it. I do believe that technology is important to actually integrate all these different parts. But at the end of the day, it's how we build that ecosystem to kind of evolve with the planet, as opposed to everything we do. We build buildings, we do all this stuff to keep nature out. How do we actually look at integrating all the pieces and working with nature and everything to really develop the next generation of really life in general, right? As opposed to just talking about the cloud. It's, clouds don't exist without a planet, without oceans, without, right? All of this stuff works together. And so a lot of our thought processes go into, in my team, is how do we envision that collaboration of all of the different ecosystems on the planet? A little out there.
Yeah, no. And that's what I always love about it, is because you put in these thought-provoking questions that all of us kind of scratch our head on and go, yeah, I don't know exactly, but yeah, we got to think about how those pieces are coming together. And, I said that this ties back into the sustainability initiative, that, think about every click improves the future. I remember when we sat down and started working through those words, just those simple words themselves, and the statement that follows it around the, digital infrastructure contributes to the global economy. So there's an economic side, right? And society. It's got to make balance with this without harming the planet. Three very different things, but all have to work in harmony. Because for us to open opportunities and to bridge the digital divide and give connectivity and all the other pieces, we have to think differently in how we've done this before. So Eddie, with that, give us your perspective.
Well, I think that the challenge is that oftentimes we don't feel like we can do much. We just do what we feel like is an incremental improvement or some small piece. So what happens is our vision gets much shorter, and the shorter our vision gets, the less impact we really make. And the other part of what happens that I think is unfortunate is we celebrate things that are really, I think popular, but not necessarily impactful. And so, and so what you find is that, people will work to invent or innovate in areas that are the popular issues of the day or the popular issues of now, but not really use data and analytics and the technologies that we have available to us that we're developing, and those that we need to develop to really get at the heart of some of these problems and look at them in a way, just as Christian would say, in this environmentally integrated system. And so we know these patterns exist. We see them all the time. It doesn't matter how you look at it and which field or which area of life you look at it. And Christian and I had, when we were kind of prepping and talking through all these things that, that led up to this event, we talked about food, and we talked about population, and we talked about a lot of different things that, technology plays a role in, but oftentimes we just look at it as, green power, for example, or sustainable methods of work, or sustainable methods of, destroying, the electronics we build, or things like that. But in reality, these things extend way beyond not even just our planet. I mean, now we're trying to go to Mars with technology, And what are we going to do there? Are we going to just take the problems that we've created here, or are we going to actually try to find, try and find these solutions and what the root is of these solutions and figure out how to be better stewards? So I think, when you start thinking about, the scope, I think it's sort of like back in the 60s, whenever, the space race was on. There was actually absolutely no way you could do an incremental innovation or even incremental invention to get to what we did in the space race, what all the world did in the space race. To be honest with you, it's not just the United States; it was the whole world considering to look beyond that. And this vision they had, and this belief that they could accomplish it, I think fueled them. And the incremental steps were just the method of how we got there. So.
Yeah, could I add something else?
Yeah.
2 years ago, we had an iMasons event in London, a workshop, if you recall, and we broke up into groups to kind of brainstorm about, technology in the future and so on. And I had this great epiphany because of this young man from Africa who was in my group, and somehow I don't remember how we got on the topic, but he talked about the fact that, because we were talking about the whole notion of everything being an ecosystem and so on, and he said he remembers a day when he was out fishing with his grandfather, and they were talking about somehow nourishing the ground, and that he was killing some bugs or something, and but his grandfather stopped him and said, look, those all play a role. We need to leave them in our soil, because they will help nourish for our next planting. And this whole notion of wow, we shouldn't be using insecticides to wipe everything out and sterilize the ground. We should be really thinking, how do we nourish it and make it more fertile? And that was really my epiphany on, boy, we really need to be thinking about our data centers the same way. How do we make wherever we go more fertile and more productive, not just for us, but for everything around us? And so it's really given me a view that I'm really studying nature. And in fact, in my team, we even have a biologist, is really to look at natural systems and how they operate, and then seeing how we can use technology to emulate that. I mean, of everything from photosynthesis, right? I mean, you need quantum computing to actually emulate photosynthesis or develop technologies for photosynthesis. But these are the things, if you look at the problems with the planet, it's because we don't behave like nature. We just behave in one dimension of perhaps nature, as opposed to this integrated symbiotic type of situation. And when I think about it, that's really the essence of everything. And I'll never forget that young man when he brought up that whole thing that his grandfather scolded him. This is all stuff we knew. His grandfather knew, 50 years ago. And we are not even taking advantage of, I would call that almost technology. It's biological technology. How do we actually leverage what nature and our ancestors already knew?
Let's peel that back a little bit, Christian. You've talked about this before, where as an industry we can be kind of insulary, like we're too focused on ourselves, and so we shouldn't be self-serving in this. Can you elaborate a little bit more on that?
Oh, I would argue we should be self-serving. It's called having life continue, right? So it is for selfish reasons. Maybe not for me, but at least
Everyone
my
else.
kids and so on, and everyone else. But our industry has always, and this is true with every industry, and particularly in its infancy of growth and so on, it's really about market share, this, that. But we have gotten to such a scale where, first of all, we do compete, but at the same time, it's in all of our interests at the scale we're operating at to work collectively to ensure that our industry has positive impact to what's all around us. Certainly the services we all provide, positive impact, but at what cost? And the real question is now, how do we do that same thing with a way that actually makes everything better, everything we touch better. So, and that's what nature does. And so I'm totally fascinated. I've been studying in the past year a lot about biological systems and, the oceans. And, fortunately, I have this luxury to do that with my time. And it's been really eye-opening and fascinating. I don't know if it's the right answer, but, again, this is the fun about playing in the sandbox.
Yeah. Yeah. And I love the fact, because I think you're right in the zone, as I was talking about before. You're doing exactly what you want to do. This is the big thinking and the challenging and the debating, right? That we talked about, the origination.
And I get paid for it too. That's the amazing thing.
What a concept. Yes. And you can do your part to go back and really help with the survivability of the human race.
Yeah.
And that sounds huge, right? And all that, but the reality really is around the sustainability side.
The vision and the excitement around what Christian's saying is so great. And Christian and I actually, sometimes we end up in really quick debates, which I love, right? Because what happens on this, and sometimes when people hear us, they think, wow, these guys are really passionate and like getting ready to throw down. But you know what it is that we're communicating, we're making intellectual appeals to each other, we're leveraging facts that we know. And this has become a new issue. Like right now, our industry, the digital infrastructure industry, is really the platform. If you think about our companies and what we're involved in, we're pretty much known right now for just social media, engineering, the population, entertainment, really things that are not necessarily positive in light. I'll just say that in general, right? I mean, I think it's more about the fact that we're not leveraging the technologies that are available to us to do what's more good than beyond just that. And what happens is with a plethora of misinformation and good data and fact that's mixed together, now you can't differentiate those things that are truthful, or those things that have been proven, or those things that matter, those things that help us to make good and sound decisions. And I think that's an area that we can have a great deal of influence on. And really it comes down to, how do we leverage all these things that we've built over the last 35 and 40 years? How do we leverage them in a way where we share truth and we have data that backs that truth? How do we do that in a way that really helps to fuel the opportunities to make a difference? Because no one wants to work on things that aren't true. They don't want to, they don't want to spend half their life trying to generate outcomes based on lies. So, I mean, I'm passionate about what Christian's talking about, but I'm also passionate about how do we help, really bring data to the forefront that is factual, truthful, and allows us to make better predictions in this, ecosystem that we're trying to figure out how to be good stewards of.
This reminds me, remember the first Greenpeace report?
Yeah.
Right. And just the approach for it is how I think it was how dirty your cloud is, or something like that. And while the approach was kind of a negative one, in the end of it helped people open up, and the whole ability to do that. But one thing that I think was important in this is that we do need to be able to not control the narrative, but share the narrative. There's such good stuff going on already within our industry, and some amazing people, including yourselves, that are doing the right thing, right, to drive this future. And I think that right now we're the best unknown industry in the world. Everybody uses it, but like you said, they expect it's for watching movies on Netflix or something else. But it actually is the fabric, right? The interconnections for how the world operates. And like we always say, without the infrastructure we build underneath, the world would stop. Right? This technology is extremely important. But let me shift a little on that, Eddie, because I want to ask you specifically about it. You talk about, and we've seen this in a couple of things, that we're on an accelerated path up to a fragile failure across the world, right?
Yeah.
And so tell me what that means.
Yeah, I mean, when obviously I live in Dallas, Texas. When the Great Freeze hit in February in Texas, we had a major power event. It made me start thinking about, there was a major power event not long ago with the fires in California. There was a major power event and in the New York area. There was a major power event, and down in the San Diego area not that long ago, right? So I started thinking, well, why is that with all the technologies and all the capabilities that we have today, why do we have such a fragile environment? And why couldn't we get power back? Like I went for three and a half days without power. My family was wrapped around one little gas stove, in the house. You think we would have these capabilities, but we didn't. And as we started to get more information about what was happening, it was, just a circular process of how the natural gas providers couldn't, pull gas out of the ground in order to power the power plants, in order to deliver these things, because they had dependencies on the same power grid. They didn't have redundant. It just kept going and going and going. And the same thing goes for the power distribution. And so I came back to the board and I came back to iMasons and I said, you know what? It turns out we need to make some very bold statements, and then we need to start the dialogue. Mm-hmm. And the bold statements are the power grid we have today will not sustain, a future that runs digital ecosystems, right? I mean, we look at it right now and we're not ready to support those things. And people say, well, we'll make applications more resilient. We'll distribute them more in a higher distribution model. And when I started this conversation with Christian goes, Eddie, it's bigger than that. It's much bigger than that. It's the part of the reason why more disasters are happening is because of how the ecosystems of our world is being affected. How, the largest environment that we have has become, where we basically get our food, where we live, where where we generate resources, where we find resources is becoming more arid. So all these things that really are integrated, that are interdependent, it almost like a Star Wars symbiotic story, right? But from all these things that come together, like we have to solve much deeper problems than just, getting Texas on a parallel grid. It's got to be much bigger than that.
Yeah, Christian, I'm gonna pull on this a little bit because we've been debating and discussing and debate about this, that our industry seems to be focused on incremental gains versus kind of changing the game, the bigger thing. So you just talked about how climate change is really behind these rapid temperature changes, which is now causing this cascading failure within the electrical distribution within Texas. And then you think about challenges around the world, seas rising, everything else. Like it's all tied together in this ecosystem, you're saying. But how do we actually, in our industry specifically, change the way people are thinking from those incremental gains to large transformational disruptive gains?
That's a tough question. If I look at, whether it's world politics or politics in the States or wherever, I see a lot of change, but it's all in the wrong direction. Mm-hmm. And I think part of it is sharing information in a way that's truly, I think there's a lot of misinformation out in the world, and as a result, it's creating division and disagreement as opposed to bringing curiosity to the forefront. I think the main ingredient to solve all of the issues we see coming, and frankly, even just the day-to-day issues in our industry, is really curiosity. And I think that's probably one of the most important, I don't know, is that a value or what that is, but behavior, but we really have to instigate curiosity. And to some extent, I feel that, people from my generation, if they don't have curiosity, they'll never have curiosity. But so I spend a lot of time with the youth, around the neighborhood and, doing all sorts of stuff, because I really think it has to come at a really early age. If it's easier to get curious when you're younger versus when you're older. But mm-hmm. to me, the real ingredient to all of this is curiosity on how different things work, curiosity on what impact your industry is having, curiosity on, what's happening in the oceans and curiosity about climate change. Regardless of what you believe, it's the curiosity that will get you the answer. versus, reading certain positions and being either on the position of climate change or not on the position of climate change. I don't care where you stand, and I love to talk to people with different views, as long as you're curious enough to understand where I stand. And so to me, that's what seems to be missing more than anything else, is that notion of curiosity and cultural aspects, being curious about people's backgrounds, where they're from. It's not about necessarily agreeing, but at least being curious about what makes everything where it is. So, I mean, I think about this a lot, and I think that's what we really need more than anything else, is curiosity.
So the curiosity of a child. I'm going to tie this to two words from what you just said: complacency and conservatism. Conservatism, if I can say that word correctly. Because I believe one of the biggest challenges that we face today is that we have in our industry a very conservative approach. And don't get me wrong, we have dedicated, passionate people that are doing amazing work. But I look at our industry right now, and I think that half of the industry is primarily focused on uptime still. It's all about the resiliency of the data center. And that redundancy and corresponding low utilization because of that tenant behavior in a lot of these environments conflicts with efficiency and sustainability. So the curiosity of not being complacent about, I'm just accepting the way that is. Let me give an example of that. We've projected there's over 35,000 megawatts of data center capacity globally, 35,000 megawatts. My belief, just me individually, is that 10,000 megawatts of that is stranded, unused. So are we complacent, right? Is it just we're accepting that the revenues are positive and everything is good? Or is it inherently around some other things of being very conservative about what it is? Are we not thinking big enough, being curious enough to say, this is not okay, we should think about it differently? So Eddie, how do we get our industry to think differently to influence that bigger change? When there are opposing priorities like this.
Yeah, I mean, I think, look, there's nothing wrong with conservatism as long as it is right. And so I think that there's a piece of it that really challenges us, and that is that we don't have control a lot of times over the outcomes of how things work, and we don't have systems that adapt well enough to when change occurs, right? Mm-hmm. And so I know I'm getting fairly philosophical about this, but there are patterns that already exist outside of our data center industry for underutilized systems that identify how to have much greater utilization. Let me just give you an example, right? You can, going kind of back to Christian's message, you can go back to nature and look at the productivity of 1 hectare of land versus another hectare of land. And the grasses or the plants or the ecosystem in 1 hectare of land may have the ability to have a higher utilization of the energy that's in that environment than the other would, and what causes that? And is there ways that we can pattern ourselves in our industry so that we could take greater advantage of, the energy that we're consuming? And how do we generate? I remember we used to have these arguments all the time, and I know you guys are going to. Henry Wong we used to always fight about what's useful work in the industry, right? When we were working on the PUE standard, right? We were like, how do you define useful work? Which IP, which single bit is the most useful over another, and that's more sustainable versus another? And these are things we're talking about in scope 3 activities right now. So just to go back and be very specific to answer your question, I think, look, when we think about the problems we're trying to solve, and you think about the 10 megawatts of unused or lost heat, for example, basically, that happen when we're doing compute and platforming and those type of solutions inside of our industry. I think we just have to think differently from the perspective of, you have to be willing to be vulnerable and be wrong. You have to be willing to hear other people's voices. You have to be willing to test the data of the truths that you believe against data that says it's not. You have to be willing to participate. You have to be willing not to be in your own echo chamber. I think these are all activities that make you vulnerable. And what makes you conservative is fear, fear that you're going to make the wrong decision, fear that you're going to let somebody down, fear that you're going to have something outside of your control. So you have to find the patterns of successful, systems that have figured out how to, either by nature or ecological change, or have figured out how to adapt to those situations. And I think we get to apply that, but you're not going to get there unless you allow yourself to be vulnerable to be wrong.
So, Christian, another challenge I see with just what Eddie was talking about, this, I showed what I believe is one of the challenges when it comes to utilization. And again, there's a lot of reasons behind it, but we're accepting a lot of those reasons as things we can't change. And I think that's one thing we've got to go back and challenge. Like if you accept it, then you're getting complacent. You're getting complacent, you're going to get the result that you expect. And so, but if I look at right now, the current growth, you've talked about this a number of times. We're building a ton of capacity around the world, right? And the pandemic has accelerated because there's been more need. But based on the numbers I just mentioned, we're building more data centers than we need right now. If we've got that much stranded capacity, we should be able to unlock it. That's driving more embedded carbon and more things, and it's perpetuating that problem. Yet the returns for the investors are higher than ever. Think about all the money that's pouring back in that now data centers are an asset class. That money keeps flowing. So how do we balance the economics and the ecology around this? Because that's that ecosystem again. Like we can make more money. It's inefficient. We can make more money. Well, how do you balance it out to say we should be doing this and making each of them actually profitable?
Yeah, that's there's all sorts of ways that can be taken. I'll say this. I think what drives more efficient systems is scarcity. And as long as resources and all these things are not scarce, or at least not perceived to be scarce, then there's very little done to improve those things, because scarcity drives costs, and scarcity is what wakes people up. The real challenge is, and this is why I like to think 5-10 years in the future, because what we do see is scarcity in some of these things that we don't have scarcity for right now. And the challenge is, how do we convince people that if we don't plan on these things today, it's going to be shock therapy later for our industry, frankly. And so if we project the future and assume that the things we're doing right now are going to drive some scarcity, then perhaps we'll behave differently. And this is where the whole curiosity thing comes up to me. We should be curious about the future. We should be curious about where we see things going, so that we can actually mitigate these kind of draconian natural things that can happen in our future, which we won't find very pleasant. And so to me, that seems to be the driver, because you could politically try to force through policy and all this stuff, and maybe policy can drive scarcity to some extent, whether it's through taxes or whatever. But at the end of the day, there's governments that have strict policies on something may actually not get the development and growth for their economies, right? And so it's also intertwined that it's hard to make those changes. But I do believe that things like the UN and which is why the same reason I'm interested in working much more collectively with the industry than ever before. I mean, I've always loved working with the industry, but I feel even more motivated to do so than ever before, is because I think we have to do this all collectively and project what's going to happen, and really help drive the notion of what happens in the future when scarcity hits. What happens to our industry? What happens to the globe? What happens to everything? Yeah. And I've said this before, but this was something that I got from someone I was interviewing when I asked them what sustainability means, and the answer was, and I told them I was going to steal this because I loved it so much. Sustainability is to be around for the long haul, and deservedly so. And if you really think about it, it's a wonderful definition because it applies to everything. Sustainability is for humanity to be around for the long haul, and deservedly so. Sustainability for Microsoft is the same thing, for Switch, for our industry, all those things. And I think, you know, I don't even think I'm answering your question, actually. What was your question again?
It was really about balancing economics and ecology. Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. All right. Yeah. Sorry.
Well, I'll tell you what. Why don't we do this? As always, we could go for 3 hours on it, but we've just got a few minutes left here. I want to hit on two topics that I think are very important because it ties back into the technology committee that you guys are doing. Intellectual property, right? This is challenging. So the tech committee is focused on harnessing the collective experience of the iMasons members, of course, to accelerate innovation and really do things bigger. But to do that, we have to collaborate. And that leads to the other concern, intellectual property. I mean, at iMasons, we leave our companies at the door and we connect as individuals and tackle problems together. But Eddie, I'm going to challenge you first here. How do we do that while protecting IP and the competitive advantage of the companies that we all represent?
Yeah, so I'm sure that there are attorneys and people like that that would describe this a little differently than I will. But I think intellectual property, look, every experience we have that's original for us, right, is truly intellectual property. And oftentimes we find that, you know, when we're participating in a company or we're participating in a group, where we refine those ideas, where we refine those inventions, you know, that intellectual property becomes property of someone or some organization or something like that. But it's no different than when you look at individuals. And you know, all of us in our industry, we've done very well, you know, financially and health-wise, and so we have these great, you know, outcomes because of what we've done. What you find about really well-rounded people, or people who find great satisfaction in life, is that they tend to give, and they're benevolent, and they participate in that benevolence. And I think intellectual property is no different. I think we have to be wise about the IP that we share, and we have to be wise about and good steward of the intellectual property that we retain. So if the intellectual property that I help develop, or that I'm a steward of, if some percentage of that, if some portion of that could advance the ecosystem that we're talking about, could advance technologies, the findings that we have in how to be more sustainable, or the findings that we have, if I hang on to that and I don't share that, is it really sustainable at that point? Great, I can sustain my company. Great, I can build on the financials around that. Or I could share that and make the entire ecosystem more sustainable. So I think you know, it requires wisdom. It requires an understanding. It requires support of your board and your shareholders and those kinds of, you know, systems. But I also think it takes someone to be a champion, to say, look, we can hang on to every piece of our IP, or we can determine what does the greater good, and separate that from what's going to make us, you know, profitable in a way that we can sustain ourselves as a company, but still be able to profit the whole ecosystem. So
yeah, and Christian, I'm going to go right into this because Microsoft has done some unique things along with HPE and Cisco, specifically on O&I. So that's the Open Invention Network, right? And I think you guys had said you're sharing patents through that. But then just lately, you had granted free patent access to low carbon innovators.
Yep.
So
It was.
tell us
That's
a
right.
little bit more about that.
That was. I think it was 3 companies. It was HP, Facebook, and Microsoft.
Facebook, Microsoft. Yeah, sorry.
Right. They granted free patent access for low carbon innovators, and it was you know, I think we're going to see more and more of this as we realize we're not competing on sustainability, we're competing on services, right? And so in that case, I think there's free access to anyone who's driving towards low carbon, or companies that are driving for lower carbon technologies. And so I don't know what that process is on how you get that free license, but the point is those 3 companies came together collectively. It's called something. Let me even look it up. The Low Carbon Patent Pledge. That's what it is, right?
Yeah.
And so I think we're going to see more of that as we start, realizing the urgency of some of the things we have to do to really promote rapid technology development. So I think it's great stuff, and I think there's more and more of this stuff happening.
And by the way, this is the challenge again, as leaders within the technology committee. We have to figure that balance out to make sure that we're protecting the inventors,
Absolutely.
the innovators, yet still accelerating these things. And these are the kind of ways to do that. But okay, I'm just going to ask one more question. And Christian, I'm going to put this back to you. One thing that you had said before is that we're kind of insular when it comes to our industry. We have to be thinking on a global stage. So what does that mean? How can we be truly influencing something that's much bigger than what we are?
Yeah, so that's a tough question, but to quickly help you wrap this up, I do believe if we become a strong industry, and this is why bodies like iMasons are important to me, we should be working with all of the other industries. We should be at the table with all of the other industries collectively, not individually, but collectively, working with pharmaceutical companies, working with the oil industry, working with Greenpeace, right? We all need to be in this common place, and similarly with the governments, to really talk about how we're going to make the trade-offs. What are the technological needs? What are the social needs? Really understand, again, to drive curiosity in that whole ecosystem type of thinking, to see how we could all be in a better place. And of course, there's always trade-offs and a tough thing, but I do want us as an industry to really look at how do we get to the place where we work at the global scale.
Yep. Sounds like we need to get more involved with the UN as well. So we need that world stage. So, all right, Eddie, bring us home here. I'm sure we've ignited quite a bit of interest within the technology committee. What can we expect from new tech committee members or from that committee? How can people get involved?
Well, first of all, we'll be setting up some more of these type of events, basically, but not just paneling. I think what Christian and I are looking for are people who are passionate, who want to participate, that want to kind of follow along what we just described, right? Is how do you make yourself vulnerable, but come to the door with your ideas, your thoughts, your passion, your curiosities, and let's work together on doing this. And then let's not be in a sounding room just for ourselves. Let's not shoot for small things, but yet shoot for tangible things that, we're going to solve world hunger. I mean, we've talked about this the other day. We're going to try to save the world, but we're also going to try to do that in a way where we bring value each time, and that we can take data-backed information to help support policymakers in a way where they're making good decisions that help to drive, our future as an ecosystem, and how we can leverage our technologies in the digital infrastructure industry to support that. And, I'm looking forward to having a diverse group. I really want to see diversity as part of our values. So when I say diversity, I'm not talking about, hey, we're just going to have, the great people who've achieved a lot in sustainability, for example, in Europe, or the folks that have achieved a lot in technology, growth in EMEA and in Asia and in the US. What I'm really looking for, right? I'm looking for diversity, for underrepresented organizations and people all throughout this world who can participate. And it may get too big, and we'll figure out how to break into subcommittees, but I'm looking for that type of thing. And then the last thing I'll say, and I think it's really important, is that we want to look at the world focus, but we need folks who can address it. And we talked about this in sustainability as well. We need folks who can gather together on a local level as well about the issues that are specific to that local area, and then elevate those up to this global stage at the same time. So it's going to be a process of really kind of pulling these teams together. But look, if nobody joins up and participates, then it's just me and Christian all the time.
And we talk a lot already, so yes. Yeah. So look, first off, thank you guys for this. It's been fascinating, and the whole idea of thinking differently for this is what I want people to take away from it. Remove the assumptions that you've got. But I also want to personally thank you for your passion and leadership as we dive into technology and take this to the next steps in the global stage. And I look forward to seeing the amazing work that the Tech Committee will do. So thanks, guys. Really appreciate it.
Thank you.